In the study of entrepreneurial decision-making, it's very helpful to understand and recognize your personal decision-making style. So today we're going to take some time and examine that, and follow on with an exercise that's tied to that. And we'll also talk about how you can use that to understand your personal preferences for decision-making and what you may do to adapt, anticipate, and evaluate your decision-making styles. There are two large buckets that we'll start with. One is the rational element. The rational decision-making where you are data-driven, you are fact-driven. You want to make decisions based on logical analysis. That you don't rely on your gut, or prefer not to, particularly if it contradicts what you're finding in the facts and in the rational analysis that you're making. Separately of that is the bucket of intuition, of making those decisions that are feeling-based, that are emotion-based. You may, in this case, avoid the facts. You may avoid the logical analysis if it contrasts with what your gut tells you. And so when you ponder that, consider, are you rational or are you intuitive when it comes to significant decisions, when it comes to strategic decisions? And I would caution you to beware your initial answer, because one fault with these types of self-evaluations is that they're often biased. They often are driven by us reconciling or responding with our desire for what we can be as opposed to what we are. And that's true of many of these types of evaluations, and that we respond, if it's not posed with any level of context, in a general, almost an aspirational way, instead of in a real way or historic way. So when you think about rational versus intuitive, I encourage you to put it in the context and to think about past actions. Think about a career choice. Think about a significant purchase. Think about personal relationships. And to what extent were you rational or intuitive there? And that's probably a better indicator of your preferred style when you look at it historically and what you've done and why you've done it, and what role the rational or the intuitive played in that, than arbitrarily thinking about it just in a broad sense. So think about what you've done driven by past action. I'll give you a minute to review this strip. If you're not familiar with it, Dilbert is a very popular, or was a very popular comic spread here in the US. So I'll give you a moment to read through it. So what we see here is a bit of a cautionary tale on bewaring your intuition. Oftentimes we modify our intuition when we have new information or different information, or things aren't going exactly like we thought, so we modify or change things without necessarily having a reason or a rational level of analysis that guides that. So again, just a bit of a comic tale on bewaring that intuition while not ignoring it. What we see with successful entrepreneurs is that they do require a mix. So in that way, when we look at the various elements of the startup venture, you can work to be rational, but you're never going to have all the data. You're never going to have absolute facts or answers on what to do. Inversely, you're not always operating on the dark. You're not always operating without information and without resources. So you don't have to be entirely intuitive about everything. So the challenge of naturally is to recognize where you are, where your preferences tend to be, and what you can be to augment that, and to ideally raise your competency in both, that you can make decisions that are highly rational and highly intuitive. And we'll talk about those in a few different contexts. Concept development is certainly one that should involve market research and a lot of gut feelings as well. That early ideation phase, so what is the product? What is the initial service? What's the benefit that you want to bring forth? Takes a lot of intuition and initial hopes. Soon after that, there's the element of market analysis. Does anybody care? Is there a customer out there? Is it competitive with what's already in the market? And that's where we can integrate some of these factual and analytical efforts into where things are now, but recognize too that you need to understand where the market is headed, where your competitors are headed, and that takes you back to this element of gut and intuition of where do you think the competitor's next product is going to land? What do you think the feature set of your competitor is going to be 6 months from now? And so we continue to have to exercise both of these elements of rationality and intuition when we look at concept development. We also want to recognize that customer discovery invokes that same necessity as well. Customers are difficult to understand, and their needs and wants change over time. And there is the expectation that you're going to do research, but you're also going to do some of your own discovery and analysis and apply some of your own gut feelings to that too. Product design and prototyping requires both vision and quantitative data. You want to understand and think about engaging with team members or advisors or other people in your circle that can challenge your thoughts, that can make suggestions, that can help you evolve your ideas to better understand what your product could be or should be. You also want to recognize the value of generating alternatives, testing those assumptions, gathering data, understanding what works and what doesn't work, and why do people prefer certain things, and will they pay for that feature or feature set, and what will they pay? Again, integrating the rational and the element of being a little more intuitive. You also want to keep asking yourself what information is missing. What can you add? What would you like to add? What do you need to know to make the next leap in the creation of your firm? Fundraising. Very quantitative in many ways. What are your revenues, your expenses? What are your incomes? How much funding do you need to raise? At what point? At what time? On what terms? At what valuation? With what interest? You cannot go into an investor and just give them your gut feeling. Nor should you do it to yourself. So in that way, when we look at fundraising, very numbers driven, now there is intuition that's factored into that, and how you do your estimates, and what your expectations are, and what your key assumptions are. Again, a balance of both. So in summary, when we look at these elements of decision-making style, we as entrepreneurs need to make relatively quick decisions with high stakes, with incomplete information, and a dynamic and changing market. That we want to understand entrepreneurial decision-making is critically important for doing that, and that we want to develop our skills. So this isn't simply an exercise of I am this way or I am that way. It's more of an exercise of recognizing where you are and what's a roadmap to enhancing those elements and what you can do to improve your decision-making and thereby improve your success in new venturing.